Joe Biden, what's left of him, has warned Israel not to escalate the fighting on the northern border with Hezbollah, lest Iran takes offense and gets cross with him. There is an election coming, and Biden needs those pesky Israelis to stop defending themselves and get off the news. This comes after Israel killed a senior Hezbollah terrorist on Tuesday in retaliation to the continuous barrage of rockets from Lebanon since the beginning of the hostility in October the 7th.
Welcome to the reality show. We're joined by Michael Kaufman. Hello, Michael. What's
Hello.
your initial reaction, Michael, to this story and to the US's attitude towards Hezbollah?
Well, the U.S.'s attitude towards Hezbollah is completely consistent with the U.S.'s attitude to all the Iranian proxies, which is that the only appropriate response is defense. We're doing it with the Houthis. We're telling Israel to do it with Hezbollah now. We're essentially telling them the same thing to do it with Hamas in Gaza. And let's not all forget that the 350 or so projectiles that came out of Iran, and Biden told Israel not to retaliate, that intercepting those missiles, most of them, 9 got through. Let's be clear, 9 got through. But the fact that we intercepted about 340 of them that's a win, he called it. It's the first time in the history of warfare where defense was considered a win. But he's consistent, so at least he keeps saying the same non-things and the same nonsense.
Yes, for sure. I just want to mention a super chat from our last show from the Daily Objective that came in right at the end. So thank you very much to Yotam Silberstein for your dollar. We appreciate it, and look forward to you hopefully enjoying the show, or if you're watching this one as well. So thank you very much, Yotam. Yes, you were saying that taking the win is not exactly a victory, but a victory that Israel did have was the assassination of Taleb Sami Abdullah, the commander of the Nasser unit of Hezbollah, and he took out 3 aides as well. But the importance of him, as I understand it, was that he was the equivalent to a brigadier general, very high up within Hezbollah, and is the most significant assassination since that of Wissam al-Tawil back in January. I mean, is this a very significant figure within Hezbollah in terms of changing their dynamic, their ability to fight? Will he be quickly replaced?
Yeah, in my opinion, I'm not an expert on the various figures in Hezbollah, but I think you have to take a step back and look at the strategy in general for both Hamas and Hezbollah. I mean, Hamas has been decimated. They are cramped into Rafah, and maybe a few left over in central Gaza and et cetera, and some other roaming people throughout Gaza, of course. But they continue to send missiles into Israel, slowly, not as many. When we had the rescue operation, they decided to send 50 missiles in, including into Tel Aviv, which were intercepted, thankfully, and so on. And they really don't seem to mind getting decimated. A lot of them want to go visit Allah, and we help them, Israel helped them along. But in all seriousness, we're not dealing with a bunch of rational people. Normally, when you take out leadership like that, they would back off, they would try to come to some negotiation table, et cetera. They are actually daily increasing the number of missiles being fired on Israel. The number of displaced Israelis is now approaching, I believe, 250,000. And we probably need to continue to just kill everyone, all the Hezbollah people before they would actually stop. And I think you're going to see that in Gaza. I don't think Gaza is going to stop fighting until nearly all of the Hamas terrorists are dead. And I think Hamas has the same view.
Yeah, it's worthwhile to point out that, as you said, taking out this guy, this Taleb Abdullah, is by no means taking out the leadership of Hezbollah, because the leadership of Hezbollah is actually in Tehran. Hezbollah is a Shiite organization, was actually even named after by Ayatollah Khomeini in the early 80s. So, that's how deep the root goes into Iran. And it's a different issue than Hamas, because Hezbollah is a serious threat It's over 50,000 strong, including reservists. And they are estimated to have about 1 million missile between rockets and drones, or everything supplied by Iran, of course. So they are a different kettle of fish than Hamas. Israel can easily squash Hamas if they only wanted to, but the fight against Hezbollah will be a bit harder. And it's probably hard for them to, having opened another front that they don't seem to want to fight in Gaza, having this one, a new one in the north against Hezbollah, could actually require the help of the United States. And that's the thing that the United States do not want to do right now. Do you think the push for Israel to accept this mangled up deal that the United States has cooked, do you think that's a way of trying and avoid having an escalation with Hezbollah?
Yeah, I think it's all attached to generally to appeasing Iran. And it's obviously getting worse the closer we get to the election, because apparently the people that Biden wants to vote for him all like Iran. And it's consistent with a lot of them singing death to America and wanting to blow up America and talk about how awful a country that all these voters live in. And I'm saying that not facetiously. I mean, these are facts. We're watching these kids, a lot of them on TV, and these protesters and so on. I think that the U.S. has been pathetic in its deliberation, or it's attempting to engineer this peace deal. I mean, Blinken is making a complete fool of himself, because as of today, and what I was reading this afternoon, Middle Eastern time, actually yesterday, I believe, Hamas came back and said, it's all good except for we're going to make these 5 or 6 major amendments. And it's essentially going to require that Israel agree to a full ceasefire before pretty much anything happens.
It seems to be,
Blinken's first statement, and it's disgraceful that he would come out and say there were some minor adjustments made on this deal, and that was his first statement. Now, they finally came out and admitted that there's some serious stuff that are, quote, non-workable. Now, this has been dragging out. This current deal has been dragging out for several weeks. And it makes the U.S., it just degrades us further. I mean, if I'm a world power looking at what's going on here, it's very clear that the U.S. has zero influence, that nobody's afraid of us. And frankly, what Biden could have done was to issue a statement about Hezbollah, which would have been consistent with Biden's own message at the beginning when October 7th happened and Biden told everyone not to mess with Israel. And everyone, in fact, is messing with Israel. Not to mention the Houthis messing with everybody in the Red Sea. I'm sorry, in that area. He could have actually said, if this continues to heat up, the U.S. is going to send more fighter jets. We're going to send strategic arms in there. We're going to put our submarines in there and there are a lot of them are already there. By the way, we still have carrier groups in the area. We could do something about this with the push of a button, literally. But there is zero political will to do the right thing here. Zero. And it's shameful. And it weakens us on the world stage. The Chinese, Russia's got tactical nuclear drills going on now. The North Koreans are getting more uppity. No one who can think should be any surprise that the world is getting to be a more dangerous place with more crazy dictator type people that are just willing to flex their muscle because the U.S. is clearly incompetent and impotent.
And yet the words you hear out of Blinken's mouth are phrases like, it's safe to say no one is looking to start a war. It doesn't look like anyone's looking to end one either, by the look of it, at least not decisively and properly, in favor of the defended party of Israel. Right. And I understand also that the commander of the Lebanese army is set to visit Washington and the Pentagon to see officials in the White House and members of Congress, presumably to negotiate on behalf of Hezbollah. what's going on here? I mean, this is just ridiculous, isn't it? And at the same time, you hear, of course, the usual word bandied about, the word of escalation, which means, escalation means don't escalate, do capitulate. That's what people are really saying when they say it, aren't they? To stop the violence and stop the threat of violence in the future from the aggressor. It's a depressing start to this, isn't it? But I think one of the fears is that Iran's can pull a lot of forces in, whether it's forces from Syria or Iraq or Yemen, to support Hezbollah should a front be opened more widely than the northern border. So how presumably Israel would have to be super prepared for such an eventuality. Is it? I guess is my question.
Yeah, again, I'm not privy to the details, although my kid is up in Syria. He did just come home, but he was up on the Syrian border for several weeks as a reservist, and had been on the Lebanon border for a couple of months actually earlier, which is a far more dangerous border right now. I mean, from what I can gather in talking to people and reading what I read, and Israel is not stupid. I mean, they're quite well aware of what could happen. They have a plan. There's almost no question that there will be significant damage in Israel. There'll probably be dead people, including in Tel Aviv. Israel will have to have, and they must be telling Washington this, that if there are significant, I mean, they keep saying if there's more escalation, and pretty much on a weekly basis there's more escalation. But at some point when Israelis get killed, especially in Haifa or Tel Aviv, in big cities, and why it should matter where they're killed is a different discussion. But if they do get hit in big cities, if the Iron Dome gets overwhelmed and so forth, they will have to level southern Lebanon. And it will come at the cost of hundreds of thousands of missiles. As you say, there's probably at least 1 million projectiles in Lebanon, controlled by Hezbollah. And all the money that the US was supposed to be blocking Iran from getting for their oil and so on, which of course the US is doing nothing about, is being used, not all the money, but a lot of it is being used to arm these people. So I think Israel must be telling Washington that this will be an existential threat. This will be a threat against Israel's very existence. Not 1,000 people dead, but it could range up to 1 million people dead if we don't defend ourselves. And we will flatten Lebanon, and there will be a lot of civilians killed. In fact, all of Lebanon will be, the bottom part of the southern part of Lebanon will be uninhabitable. Not because we use nuclear weapons, but because it'll just be completely destroyed, worse than Gaza. We have the firepower to do it. We have the UAVs, we have the F-35s now, and not to mention the F-12 and the F-15s and so on and so forth. So I think some people are aware. I mean, anybody who follows this stuff must be aware that Israel did carry out the Second Lebanon War and did flatten much of southern Lebanon. This will be worse. This response by Israel, if there continues to be what's going on, I would have done it. Personally, I would have said to the US, you've abandoned us. Find somewhere else to buy your weapons. There's plenty of people that want to sell weapons. They'll sell them to both sides. We all know that. The US is not the only supplier of weapons in the world. Get the weapons that you need, get the ammunition that you need, and go in there and do the job. It is a crime what is going on in northern Israel right now. There's just, every day, it is a disaster. And people can't live there. You can't build an economy.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to give people an idea what's been happening in the last 2 or 3 days, actually. Well, first of all, about 10,000 people, 10,000 Israeli have been displaced permanently from the north of Israel. People who used to live there had to abandon their homes because Hezbollah is throwing missiles and stuff at them. So just Tuesday, the day when Israel took out this Abdullah guy, 80 rockets, between drones and rockets, were thrown at northern Israel. Wednesday, 215 rockets and drones, which caused a number of fires, a dozen of fires or so. The area is a mountainous, foresty area. So, given the weather right now, it doesn't take much to ignite the mountain. So, all these kind of attacks are getting quite heavy. Today, so far, 40 rockets have hit the area. And at the same time, Israel had destroyed a few drones that managed to come through. Now, the problem with the firepower from Hezbollah, as you were saying, it's a dangerous border indeed, because effectively the Hezbollah are testing the defenses in Israel. Some things manage to get through much more often than we would like to have. And as you said, Tel Aviv is not that far away. I mean, it's a fairly small country, and Tel Aviv is very close to the northern border. The additional problem here is also that it's not just Biden, but it's the whole so-called international community. For example, there is a G7 in Italy right now, and the whole G7 has been brainwashed into calling for Israel to pull back, not to escalate. And as Richard said, effectively they are asking Israel to capitulate to all sorts of terrorists or whatever flavor they come. It is a very hard situation. Israel also has run some drills. I don't know whether that's just to prepare for a war in southern Lebanon, northern Israel, or is it just to show the United States we're gonna go in if you don't help us? So I don't know whether that's just a show of force or show intention rather than the intention to actually have boots on ground. But either way, it doesn't look good. It doesn't look good for Israel because the international voices are already against Israel. If they open a new front, it doesn't matter that the fact that they are defending themselves again, they are under constant barrage. The international community will still blame Israel for defending itself.
Yeah, I mean, even the Labour Party, I think in the UK today, said that they would recognize a Palestinian state I love it how they put it, with secure borders for Israel, so they could live together. Like what planet do they live on where anything to do with the Palestinian Authority has anything to do with security for Israel? I mean, this is rubbish. It is. Now, I will say, and I'm not blaming the victim here, but Israel needs to stop answering these quote allegations and start saying to people really simply, if Spain were bombed or missiles were flying into Spain, would you guys not respond? In the UK, you guys were attacked by the Germans and frankly the whole Axis in World War II. Did you not respond? Did you not defend yourselves? It's even, and what's even more astonishing about this whole thing is Hezbollah has been a terrorist organization for a great long time, as you said, deep roots to Iran, far more powerful than Hamas, has ruined Lebanon. Lebanon is a failed state. Beirut used to be so-called Paris, the Paris of the Middle East. It is a disaster. All these so-called progressive people and liberals that love to talk about how people should be allowed to self-actuate and achieve there and flourish and so on. Hezbollah has decimated Lebanon completely. It is especially southern Lebanon. And the last point is the UN is supposed to have a buffer zone in the area where the missiles are being shot from. This is by a UN resolution, a UN-controlled territory, which of course the UN has left a long time ago and left Israel to manage the missiles and so on itself. Israel has got to stop answering these little annoying questions and start asking people what they are going to do with their own population, because we can say the West is next. The West has been getting clobbered intermittently, and we've stopped a lot of stuff. We just had 8 ISIS-associated terrorists in the US arrested. Most of the progressives would have been much happier if they had been successful, because then we could show everyone why they needed to do what they did because of our oppression in America. But the West needs to start to answer hold up your hand and say we're hypocritical. Israel needs to suck it up. We wouldn't. we would actually respond the way America sort of did after 9/11, and so on, and certainly did after Pearl Harbor, which is, to my mind at least, the last time that America truly fought a war to win and decimate the enemy. And since then, we basically always put one hand behind our back. But I think we're hypocrites. We are hypocrites. All of Western Europe, almost all of Western Europe is hypocrites. I don't know if the elections in Europe will help to change some of this, but looks like the Labour Party will win in the UK, and that's very depressing from an Israel standpoint.
Yeah, you don't know how depressing it is by living here. As you mentioned, Beirut was known as the Paris in the Middle East, and that's because Lebanon was part of the French mandate. And it's not a surprise that one of the strongest voices from the G7 is Macron's, the French president, who, of course, has got, first of all, has just been transferred an election, but he's got an Olympic coming up. So it's in his interest not only generally to try and de-escalate the Lebanon issue, because already France had to deal with it in the 80s, but also because he's worried about making sure he's not pushing jihadis from France to come out of the woodwork during the Olympics itself. So he's got a double reason why he's trying to stab Israel in the back, really.
Yeah, I think what you were saying about the Labour Party there, and what planet are they on? I mean, it's primacy of consciousness planet in objectivist speak, isn't it, or cloud cuckoo land in layman talk? But yeah, I mean, a principle is a principle, isn't it? And if it's self-defense, when you're attacked from on October the 7th, it's also self-defense when rockets fly over the border at you from Lebanon. So that seems fairly easy to grasp, really. I just want to do a couple of super chats. We've got another one from Yotam Silverstein. Thank you very much. He says, thank you for this much needed voice of reason. We appreciate that. Thanks a lot. And from PC as well for 499, who says, Biden is anti-Israel like the UN. Well, you can say that again, PC. Absolutely. We totally agree with you. I think one of the questions that you raised earlier, or one of the points you raised earlier, was about Israel having the strength, the military strength to take on Hezbollah. The question is whether it has the morale and the willpower, and also what the people in the country think themselves. And of course, also whether it's got the necessary troops to do that. I mean, I noticed it's just increased the cap on reservists by an extra 50,000 up to, I think, about 350,000, just as they had like at the beginning of the war in Gaza. So are all of those factors that we should concern ourselves with, or morale and willpower, especially both at government level and among the Israeli people generally?
Yeah, so let me take the Israeli people. At least, the people I mostly interact with are Tel Avivians, and to some extent Beersheba and those areas. I think the will of the people is pretty clear that they are very disaffected with the government's response in the north. This is terrible. The fact that the north has gotten worse, not better. We actually have, I think I mentioned on the show some time ago, we have people living in our apartment building in Tel Aviv who are displaced from the north, who have not been able to return to their houses and won't until that calms down. And graciously, some people have allowed them to live in very nice accommodations for free, because these people have no money and they have no economy, really. And the government has decided in a lot of cases that those people moved out of the north are not to receive any support because they're in the north, not the south, which is, while increasing the subsidies, meaning handouts, to the Haredi ultra-religious population at the same time. Just to be very clear about the one bank account we all have in our countries. I think the people want to see a definitive response. I think most people believe that the response that Israel had in Gaza has been politically clouded. I mean, you saw one of the key, Benny Gantz, dropped out of the government because he admitted publicly, finally, and he has for the last month or so, that there are too many political considerations, and they cannot be primary over defense considerations. And we should all just, by the way, remember that the real primary goal, the primary reason for government is to protect its citizens. This is the number one reason we give up rights to our government and pay taxes, is so that they can defend us collectively. Because no person can fight off mobs of people by themselves. This is basic Western philosophy, simple stuff, right? This has been violated. It was violated in the US when we blew it in 9/11. It has been violated in Israel by the Hamas response. And frankly, it was violated by the US in all of its hamstrung, partial responses to a lot of the stuff it should do. So I think in Israel, this brings me to your second part, which was what does the government want to do? The government is untrustworthy, to be blunt. Netanyahu, everyone believes, has one goal: to stay in power as long as possible, to eventually change the court system so that if he is ever actually convicted of a crime, and there are many up for grabs here, that he would be able to get out of it somehow. He wants to keep his disgraceful coalition together, which are ironically composed mostly of people whose kids do not serve in the IDF. Let's be clear about that. We are handing out money to people whose kids don't serve in the IDF. They do not work. They, quote, study the Bible, unquote. And they basically are parasites on society. They're able-bodied people, and in many cases very bright. But they don't contribute anything to the general society. They only take. And they don't contribute their children to the defense of the country. So these people, and that's what Netanyahu's government is all about. Ben Gvir, Levine, and so on, Smotrich. These are the big three players, and they're all super right-wing. None of them have ever been in the IDF, ever, which is the first time this has happened in the history of the government. So I think the government I could well see the government I think part of the reason they haven't approached the North with any sort of more definitive, we could carpet bomb the North, we could carpet bomb southern Lebanon from our northern border tomorrow, easily. We could have done it months ago and not distracted too much from the Gaza operation, best as I've been told, because frankly, we're not doing a lot of big bombing missions in Gaza anymore, just small ones. And we have plenty of planes and so on, but we're not, and no one can understand why. And we're doing these surgical strikes. These surgical strikes don't work. They're nice, they give you some thing, and then they send off more missiles. The last part, sorry to go on for a while, but you had a big question for me. The last part is, do we have the capability to do it? First of all, I think we have a lot more soldiers than what is publicly known. The Israeli government is very good at making up numbers, usually under-promising, if you will, or underselling the numbers it has. There are estimates that the number actually involved in defense of the country are closer to 1 million rather than 350,000. But most of the technology that Israel has and what it needs to do on these fronts doesn't require so many numbers. What it needs is really, really brilliant battlefield strategy and the use of planes, which we have and they do not. And I'm sure that they have all kinds of plans to knock out most of the guided missile launch systems in southern Lebanon. Again, admitting, of course, some are going to get through and do damage. I am aware, although no one talks about it, that we have a laser missile defense system, which is much, much more efficient than any of the missile defense systems. The lasers cost essentially nothing to fire. They're very, very effective. There are not enough of these batteries, I understand, as we need. But I can't imagine, remember, Israel had been attacked by 6 armies at a time with lesser technology, but with numbers that are much bigger than they have now. And I think Israel would be able to, if they fought a real war, they would be able to annihilate much of Hezbollah very quickly and defend themselves.
Yeah, and that goes back to what you were saying earlier on about the willingness of Israel to actually do what it's supposed to do, i.e. protect its own citizens. because just in the north, 10 civilians have died, which is a relatively small number, but it's 10 people who didn't need to die if Israel were efficient and effective in doing what it should do. And of course, 15 IDF members have died as well. Again, people who didn't need to die if Israel attacked and defended itself properly. The same is true for the Gaza campaign. You shouldn't have boots on the ground and risk lives just to save the enemy. They're trying to save civilian lives, minimize the casualties, but it's a war. You're gonna have casualties, and the casualties you want to be all on the side of the enemy. You don't want to sacrifice your own people, and that's a massive failure that the whole West is guilty of. Ayn Rand talked about how evil is parasitic to the good. When the good doesn't have the moral strength to stand up for itself, the only one who profits out of it is evil. And we're seeing every day, but we choose to look the other way. We choose to ignore it, and that's so morally repellent. And it's a shame that people do not understand what the situation is. We're talking about Hezbollah and Hamas, whose aim ultimately is to set up something which is designed to squash individual right, to make people slaves. So there's no legitimacy to their claim. They haven't got the right to be independent. They haven't got the right to have a Palestinian state, because the Palestinian state is itself an anomaly. It's something that shouldn't exist because it's designed to enslave people because of the ideology behind it, because of the Islamic ideology. So
yeah, back when, I agree. Maybe it'd be worth pointing out, Marco, that back when we had, for those of you who know, the missiles of October, when Kennedy and Khrushchev almost came to a nuclear war together, and the entire situation was because Khrushchev wanted to basically convert Cuba into a missile launching ground against the US. And this was intolerable to the US. Let's be very clear that we sent a naval blockade in there and almost started World War III with nuclear weapons. It's the closest we've come to a nuclear war against Russia, and luckily they backed off. It was intolerable. Imagine this. It was intolerable to have nuclear weapons, to have essentially an equivalent of a terrorist organization within something like 80 miles of the US coast. But it's perfectly fine for Iran to establish 2 bulkheads, never mind Syria, which is essentially another Iran proxy, right next to Israel. Now, Iran, of course, is looking to get nuclear weapons, and finally admits it bluntly. Big surprise, although our idiot leaders would have us believe it was all medical, back in Obama's day. Anyway, this is considered okay. And it does show you this terrible shift in our world. And we all should remember, the hypocrisy is not acceptable. It is not acceptable. One last point, sorry to interrupt, but I think you made a great point about Macron. He believes that somehow appeasing or semi-appeasing Hezbollah and Hamas and so on before the Olympics is going to reduce the likelihood of lone wolf or Iran-sponsored terrorism. Iran has already said publicly that they are going to be initiating terrorist attacks at the Olympics. They've gleefully said that. And the response has been, oh, let's be worried. Now, you can be sure that all the secret services of all these countries are actually looking at every Muslim, especially men, but also women, anywhere near this. They're not going to tell you that, but that's what's going to happen and is happening. But this notion that somehow it's going to be better if we appease these people is absurd. Sorry to interrupt.
No, and they've already had to scale down the opening ceremony for the Olympics for security concerns. I mean, I understand it originally was going to be based on the same and was quite a long stretch. And of course, they've had to shrink that in order to make it containable and in order to keep it secure for people attending. So yeah, it's with what bated breath and concern that this event approaches, to be honest, because I think there'd be an enormous amount of relief when it's behind us, assuming it can be brought through, peacefully and safely. Now, of course, we don't have Kennedy in the White House anymore. We have Biden, but of course, it's not just about the leader, though, is it? It's about the country itself, the country of the US. I'm talking about. It's about the culture, and it's about the self-confidence in principles such as self-defense. And I think when you see what's happening in the universities and the campuses, and with so many commentators all over the US and in the media, etc., you see a lot of loss of that obvious moral compass that is necessary to respond to events like the Cuban Missile Crisis, for example, and of course what's going on now in Israel. So how do we move on from this? I mean, obviously, there's no Biden Heights being built as a settlement, is there? There is a Trump Heights, but it is, and of course, Trump did, recognize the Golan Heights in 2019. Notably, Biden hasn't reversed that in any form, and of course, he hasn't removed the embassy, away from Jerusalem and back to Tel Aviv or anything like that. So perhaps those are good signs, but perhaps they're also meaningless. If you're not going to then support a country like Israel when it's being attacked, properly and thoroughly, and to the extent that Iran knows that Israel is supported thoroughly by the US, because that is surely the crucial element, isn't it, to making sure that things don't escalate.
Yeah, I think a couple of things. I think, typically in the US, by a significant majority, Jews, at least historically, have voted Democrat. Even with Obama, when it was clear that he wasn't going to do anything to really help Israel, even after Obama went into this absurd nuclear deal with Iran, giving them billions and billions of dollars, which we all knew where that was going to go, and this notion that they would only use it for good things, as if the country had more than one bank account and somehow the money couldn't be moved. I mean, really, you have to be an idiot to listen to this stuff and believe it, but that's what politicians rely on with their civilians, is that they're not too bright or don't want to hear it or don't want to think about it. If Biden did some things that were, if you could say, aggressively against Israel, rather than passively not doing anything, I think he would lose a lot of Jewish voters. I think they would wake up. I have Jewish friends, acquaintances, because it's very hard for me to be friends with people now that are this blind, Jews especially, but anybody who's this blind, who really won't call a spade and won't admit that Biden is actively supporting Hamas and Hezbollah, and all this constraint and all this crap that's going on. Instead of just finish the war, let them eradicate Hamas. You can help rebuild Gaza, but you damn well better make sure it's not repopulated with missiles and tunnels and so on. I think he would lose a lot more votes than he would gain on the Muslim side. I mean, somebody who coins very fun terms love to say there are a lot more Jewish voters that are voting for Biden than there are Muslims who would even think about voting against right now. But they could be turned, and if he did turn the Jewish voters away, he would be in real trouble, because a lot of them are in the blue states now as well. So I think that's part of what you're seeing. I do think we have a big problem in the US. We haven't just lost the notion of self-defense. We have lost the notion of liberty. We really have. We have lost the notion that the reason these people get to protest is because they have liberty. But the people that they're protesting for don't have liberty. They are actively advocating the eradication of the fundamental right that exists in and if you want to call it, maybe you want to call life the fundamental right, because let's face it, most of these terrorist organizations think life is expendable easily. But I wouldn't go as far to say that they are advocating to eradicate life, but they're definitely eradicating liberty. And it follows from that. And they're being actively taught by a bunch of crazy college professors who come up with theories that, I think what happens is that you get theories that work, and you can't write an academic paper about it. It's done. Once you explain reality, once things work, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, if we all really built governments like that, people could thrive and people would be successful. And then what the hell would you write about and criticize and show everybody how erudite and sharp you are? And I really think we need leadership, not only in government, but in positions of institutions. All institutions need to have leadership that will stand up and do the right thing.
Yeah, yeah, and it doesn't take an academic to work out that self-confidence and moral certainty that civilization is better than living in the caves, that the 21st century is better than living in the Middle Ages, like these people are pushing us to do. I don't understand why these kids cannot see that they are actively pushing for an uncivilized group of people to have an advantage on a civilized group of people. They are actively going against progress, against civilization, against the freedom that they've been enjoying. And they don't realize that all you're advocating for is women having to be slave to men, wearing all the garb and not being free to do what they want. They're advocating for the LGBT rights to fly off a building because you're not allowed to live in a Muslim country. And they don't see it. I mean, the Muslim culture, it's not shy about telling us what they think about freedom, women's rights, gay rights, and all sorts of stuff. But we still seem unable to understand or to listen and to believe them. It's just beyond belief. It's just beyond belief.
Well, yeah, I think we do, you and I do, you both and I do, and many people listening to this show do. I hope there's a few people who are learning about this stuff, and to get, really all we want is, we don't want people to adopt our views just for the sake of adopting them. We want people to think through these things. Think through to the end game. What is the end game of what's the end game of Iran and all of its tentacles? It's very simple: to establish a worldwide caliphate. Now, if you're more on the communistic side of this absurd theocracy crap, and I say it with vehemence, with hate, but if you think it's more like communism is the answer, that we all need to distribute the wealth and so on, just remember, there are always autocrats in every communistic system. There have to be human beings that are the leaders. There's no such thing as pure communism, because people don't just automatically throw their money into a pot and then distribute it nicely. It's not how things work. If you're an ant, it's great. But it's not true for human beings. It never has, and that's why it's always failed. And this entire anarchy, you have anarchists, you have communists, and you have pro-Muslim defenders, and none of it makes sense. But it's crept into our whole critical race theory crap that we have in our universities, with our leadership that comes up with nutty ideas. And by the way, we've completely lost sight, as you said, about all the progress we've made in the 21st century, and that the fact that the Western world has brought incredible advances with Japan and others, but the Western world has led the advances in longer life, better health, better life for everyone on the planet. Ironically, a lot of the weapons that are being used against Israel and the US and Europe were invented in Israel, the US, and Europe. It's not like they have genius people in most of these other countries. They have people that can take apart downed weapons and figure out how to reverse engineer and so on and so forth.
Yeah, and it's true. We used to be as backwards as these countries, but we learned from our mistakes. We progressed, and even concepts like freedom, the creation of America based on those principles. It had to be a discovery. People had to get together and start thinking and start working out based on previous thinking and come to this triumph, effectively, of human knowledge. But they still seem to ignore it. But go back what you were saying today about the Biden vote in the United States. Why do you think we don't want to be tribalist in the sense, I belong to this tribe, therefore I'm going to behave in this way. Because the reason why we support Israel is not because of the religious component,
Yeah.
but it's because Israel is the only legitimate state, the state that protects individual rights. So there's nothing to do about the Jewish nation or this kind of stuff. But why do you think Jews in the United States are still voting for Biden? I mean, I don't see why here in Britain a Jew should still vote for the Labour Party, because they were anti-Semitic. The same people that were supporting the anti-Semitism of Corbyn are still there. So why would you ever believe that suddenly these people turn and become pro-Israel? Because they're not.
Yeah, there's a saying in the US, and I don't know how worldwide it is, that there's a lot of Jew-hating Jews. There are Jews come with a lot of guilt that they are more successful or might be more successful or better off than other downtrodden groups. The Jews were downtrodden for so long, we have to defend other downtrodden groups. And there's a mistake that somehow we should suffer in order to help these downtrodden groups rather than, it's the sort of, give a man a fish, feed him for a day, teach a man to fish, feed him for a lifetime. We seem to want to give stuff instead of teaching. And that seems to be our default, is to go with the people who just feel bad for the other oppressed groups, because after all, Jews will, we got through the Holocaust, we'll get through stuff. One other quick tidbit to get to your question, my kids went to a public high school in the US when we were living there, my two boys, and we had a number of swastika events where swastikas were found all over. Now this is a 30 to 50, it was about 30 to 50%, depending on the class, Jewish population. And swastika, and I agree with you, I'm not talking about Jews as a group, I'm talking about behavior. And we would have these, we as parents would go and go in with the faculty and the superintendent of the schools, who, by the way, the principal was Jewish and the superintendent was Jewish, and try to explain to them that a swastika is equating with the annihilation of Jews. Now, really, you would think you were talking to a bunch of people that had never heard of Germany during the Third Reich. I'm not kidding. These are Jewish people that made a decision to ignore the swastikas in the school and tell us it wasn't a big deal, and refused to acknowledge what a swastika really means. These high school students are just a little misled. It's not a big deal. Well, actually, it is a very big deal, and we are where we are partly because of that. Look, I support South Korea more than I do North Korea. In fact, I don't support North Korea at all. I have nothing in common with South Korea, but it's a reasonably democratic country. It is not oppressive. It does have interest in having its civilians flourish. It has contributed to the world, and it doesn't want to annihilate the countries around it. Simple stuff, basic stuff. But we have a bunch of people in the US that don't, including Jews, and especially I think Jews, that don't want to look, evil in the eye and call it evil. And I had many arguments with many of the Jewish organizations, which I no longer support at all in the US, because I think they failed miserably. And I think, frankly, I thought that 3 years ago, before all of this, they've had a chance to try to stop or slow anti-Semitism, reverse it, and they never did. They always thought they used to say to me, well, if we just do this, people will like us. And I think there's this ridiculous notion that you can appease evil. And all you do when you appease, it's like appeasing cancer. It will kill you. I just don't know why. I really think they're foolish, and I think they're unrealistic.
And it's just a part of altruism, ultimately, isn't it? You're just sacrificing yourself for the enemy, without recognizing your own values being superior, simply because they're based on, objective reality. But I think one of the questions I wanted to ask was essentially, when it comes to the goal, because there's a very clear goal when it comes to what the aim is with Hamas in Gaza, to wipe out the government, to make sure that the military capability is removed, and that there's no future threat to Israel's security. Now, when it comes to Hezbollah, that is an awful lot. I mean, obviously, the ultimate goal is simply to restore security once more. That's the purpose of it. But the defining point at which you've declared you achieve that is a lot harder to ascertain. And I think one of the things that the US envoy has been saying, this is Amos Hochstein, when he was in May, when he was talking about the deal that the US is trying to broker regarding Hezbollah is essentially to get Hezbollah to retreat north of the Litani River, as it was back in like 2006. And I think, is that sufficient, even if it were agreed to and plausible, or is it simply the fact that these agreements have been endlessly broken ever since? You're supposed to have had agreements since like 1993, haven't you? With a peace agreement that nobody's going to fire rockets at each other across this border or attack each other across this border. And of course, Hezbollah breaks that endlessly, and Israel, by necessity, has to defend itself. So how would you even define what the goal is before you can set in motion achieving it?
Right. I'm a practical guy, I think, and I practice medicine this way, and I think you have to change. In the case of Hezbollah, the goal will be to establish calm on the north so that people can return to their homes. And I don't know what an acceptable number of missiles is, but it's not very many, and I'm talking single digits. Frankly, any missiles coming over from there is breaking the agreements or breaking what we need to allow. And we should have a zero tolerance policy. Giuliani, this is a microcosm of this, but New York City was a mess. And Rudy Giuliani took over as mayor, and he said, I'm going to zero tolerance on crime. I'm putting a cop on every street corner, and they did it. And New York was literally transformed in less than a year. New York City, Manhattan, was transformed in less than a year to a place where people could go with families and go around and feel safe. And you could walk from one end of Central Park to the other and not worry so much, especially during the daylight and mostly during the evening, not at night. But you could certainly walk around most of Manhattan, certainly from the bottom tip up to, say, 110th Street, all the way, because Giuliani had a zero tolerance policy. And Israel needs to have a zero tolerance policy. I mean, one family living in the north being bombed dying in a missile strike is not acceptable. None of us, well, we say that, but I'm sure if Biden, when we have our next terrorist attack in the US, if we have a weak president the way we currently do, it'll be acceptable losses. There'll be a, quote, proportional response, as Obama said when we had Benghazi and our ambassador was killed. He said, we're going to bring the perpetrators to justice. This is an act of war. What are you talking about justice? This is not a constitutional issue of breaking a U.S. crime for a U.S. citizen. They killed our representative of the U.S. and attacked the embassy, this semi-embassy that we had, call it whatever. Anyway, I think it's very functional, Richard, the way you define this. You do what it takes. You take the gloves off, and you do what it takes to annihilate the people that are trying to kill you, and you do it until they stop. And if it's a protracted event, you've got to get them to zero. You've got to get them to stop. And then you put in a peacekeeping force, and hopefully it's enforced. It won't be. We all know it won't be, because the UN is a disgraceful organization. The peacekeepers have left there a long time ago. The peacekeepers, UNRWA, we all know about that in Gaza. The UN has no interest in Israel's safety. Frankly, very few people, if anybody, does right now, except for Israel. I think that's the way you define it. And I think Israel has to stop with worrying about proportional.
Yeah.
It just doesn't work. How about as was said in one excellent TV series, how about a disproportionate response this time? How about like we did an atomic bomb on Japan ×2 that it took to stop their terrorist kamikazes from killing us? It took 2 atomic bombs to get them to stop. And I'm not saying use nuclear weapons there, but I'm saying you get in there and you just carpet bomb the place. You bring it back to the Stone Age. It's already halfway there anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. And to be honest, in a society where the response to 9/11 is don't blame the Muslims, Islam is a religion of peace.
Yeah. It's a
You know,
peaceful, yes.
you don't leave much scope for
No.
any survival, do you? But anyway, thank you for this chat. We run out of time now. Where can people find more about you?
Check LinkedIn, Michael Kaufman, 2 Fs.
Cool.
Thank you, and thank you very much, Michael, and thank you to our super chatters as well. And we'll be back here on this channel tomorrow with the Daily Objective and the reality show. So please join us then. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Have a good night. Bye bye.